Okay, we are still continuing down the Dalmatian coast, and just a reminder, you're probably aware, but while we're doing these videos to dig into the history of the Venetian Republic after promising it for, well, genuinely years we've been teasing this series, we also have a series of travel episodes from Croatia, so do check those out in the Balkans playlist. But we've also got a ton from elsewhere, including Greece and the Greek islands. I've still got a soft spot for all the Crete episodes. So yes, there's a lot more to see here, and maybe drop a like and a comment on your way past to help us out. Back to Split. It is one of the most important cities in Croatia, the second largest in population, a hugely significant hub for the whole of the Dalmatia region, and a ferry port to the large islands nearby. However, while Split has some significant Venetian heritage, to really understand what's happening here, you have to look at what's going on in the wider region. Beginning a little further north and west, at a town I wasn't able to devote much time to in the travel episodes. While nowadays a town that feels small compared to the sprawl of Split or Šibenik and Zadar further up the coast, Trogir was amongst the significant cities of antiquity that we've covered so far. It's another that could trace its founding to Greek colonists as far back as the 200s BC. Now that we're a few episodes in, you've probably caught up with the broad strokes of what happened following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire's control in the region. Trogir would for a time remain a Latin-speaking town that would be nominally under the banner of Constantinople, but having to negotiate the rising Croat power in the region, and when the Venetian fleet in the year 1000 arrived to both control piracy and assert dominance over the cities in the region, Trogir, like others, was forced to submit to Venetian rule. And cue a few hundred years of Hungarian and Venetian control going back and forth. If you visit Trogir now, unusually, while it has some identifiable artillery fortifications, such as this round tower on the north side, it doesn't have a bastion fort like everywhere else along this stretch. Instead, its castle survived in a form we'd more recognise as medieval. The castle is known as Camerlengo and was mostly built in the 1400s, though it was actually an expansion around this, the Variga Tower, built at the end of the 1300s. It's a pretty uncomplicated design, a square of 4 towers, well, an irregular trapezium, but let's not get picky, with the Variga Tower rising as the most prominent in the southwestern corner. Not that I'm complaining, but I haven't come across a particular reason why the Venetians didn't upgrade the fortifications like they've done elsewhere. I mean, the castle is pretty sturdy as it is. It's possible that with Split, only about a 10-mile sail away and much more heavily fortified, it was decided not to concentrate resources on also refortifying Trogir. You can still see pieces of the city wall, but only in parts. You can see this familiar bit of cordon here, this gate just surviving sandwiched between modern buildings. St. Mark's Tower in the northwestern corner is probably the best surviving chunk of sea wall. This looks more like it. Built in 1470, so about 50 years after the castle in its current form, you could see the gap between the island and mainland better if it wasn't so clogged with boats. Then again, the view inland is rather cluttered itself. I must admit, it's quite nice to hear someone else say it for a change. However, what Trogir lacks from its exterior walls, it more than makes up for in its interior. With a wealth of Venetian Gothic and Romanesque flourishes, and, as the UNESCO inscription is quick to point out, not unlike Porec from a few episodes ago, much of the street layout with all its right angles is preserved from its ancient Hellenistic foundation, even if the buildings have gradually been replaced one by one. This is the town Logir, built in the 1400s. It's pretty great. I don't remember exactly why I don't have a wide shot of it. I think it's mainly obscured by cafe tables in the daytime. But no contest. Out of all the beautiful parts of the city, the cathedral is just unreal. Its apsidal form is a throwback to the early Christian cathedral on the site that was destroyed during an Islamic raid in 1123. The rebuilding of the cathedral and its subsequent layers carried on for the next 5 odd centuries. The Venetians would destroy and then rebuild parts of the interior. The bell tower was begun at the end of the 1300s but not completed until around 200 years later. But without doubt, the most striking of every feature of this incredible place is the western portal. Completed in 1240, it's the work of the Croat sculptor Radovan, and it's just the most astonishing piece of Romanesque ecclesiastical art. Don't get mad, but this kind of looks like what an AI prompt would come out with for a medieval Romanesque portal, but it is absolutely real. And we've got to have a quick supercut to see the rest of the cathedral. town does have other beautiful churches. This is the spire of the Chapel of St. Sebastian, opposite the cathedral, built in 1476. This spire belongs to the Church of St. Peter, founded in 1242, with many renovations over the centuries. Near the castle, the Dominican monastery, built in 1370 with a particular beautiful rose window. I know we just had one, but I think we need one more supercut to catch the rest of the town, and then we'll move along. If you've had an eye on the dates, you'll notice that since Venice took full control of Trogir by 1420, most of the city's more striking architecture predates that, and we've done an accidental bait and switch there. Now, while Trogir might have had a foundation in the 200s BC, its destiny was to be steered by other cities in its near orbit, and in Roman times, Trogir was largely superseded in importance by the metropolis of Salona, just a short distance away, which is where we need to head next. Now, Croatia is blessed with a wealth of historical remains stretching back deep into ancient times, but while it might not have the soaring arches of the Pula Amphitheatre or the elegant marble of Split nearby, probably the most significant Roman site in the whole country is that of Salona. Nowadays, it's a sprawling complex that retains a great many features of the Roman settlement precisely because of its total abandonment after the beginning of the 600s, with attacks by Slavs and Avars. It had been the capital of Roman Dalmatia. Its population may have reached as high as 60,000, and Salona had been the port city on the Adriatic, much in the same way Split is still a major shipping hub now. And the destruction of Salona would become the midwife for the next millennia of history in this part of the world, its citizens fleeing to nearby Trogir, while also taking refuge in what had been the fortified palace of Diocletian. Incidentally, the entire area wasn't totally emptied of people. While the Latin-speaking population of Salona abandoned the city, the Slavs who migrated into the area made a settlement to the east in what is now Solin, which grew and still has the remains of some incredibly significant early Croat churches. But though I barely have any good pics, there is a small Venetian-era fort here. I was having to frame out the building work when we were there. This was the summer they were doing major work. It now seems to have morphed into an events venue. This was built in the 1500s by the Ottomans. It's unusual, as little Ottoman architecture survives in Croatia. It's not entirely clear if there was an early fortification there, but it does incorporate the ruins of a much earlier church from the 500s. But with that context, we should head the short distance south, now packed with the expanding sprawl of the modern town of Split. Now, the old town that sits at the nucleus of the gigantic modern city is quite clear from the air. Again, while we're not going to dwell on it very long for its many Roman parts, to understand Split, you have to see its earliest iteration as a fortified palace. Having been born in Salona, Diocletian was the first Roman emperor who attempted to retire from rule, and he did so in this lavish Adriatic palace. The form of this is quite visible for much of the square circuit of city walls. With the destruction of Salona, at least part of the population who hadn't fled to Trogir or left the region entirely took refuge behind the walls, in a story that must have played out in 1,000 different locations around the former Roman world. A complex, originally built as an opulent dwelling for a handful of the rich and powerful, was retrofitted as a settlement for the common folk. Over time, the medieval town would then expand to the west, essentially doubling the size of the complex. The Venetians, in turn, would add some projecting bastions around the city, but while parts of this are still somewhat visible, such as the Cornaro bastion to the north, they are much less noticeable in the fabric of the modern city of Split unless you know what you're looking for. These diagrams are perhaps the most helpful in seeing the evolution over time. There's a lot of back and forth for the control of Split in the High Middle Ages, not unlike the rest of the Dalmatian coast. And while I try to make sure to be using other sources than the wiki, this diagram is just too useful not to borrow. So, for once, and since this episode has to cover about 3.5 cities, I'm going to allow myself to abridge the Middle Ages pre-1420, before the Venetians had full control. As far as the development of the city, structures began to spill beyond the original Roman walls of the palace in around the 900s, and by the 11 to 1200s, the city had at least doubled in width. Following the Venetian control of the city, you can see a number of ornate palaces being built. You can see the city has a fair amount of Venetian Gothic around. After last time's speedrun, I promised not to surgically examine every Venetian building in a town, but it is interesting to see that Split contains several palaces that have been attributed to the architect Juraj dal Mantinak. He made this, and amongst others. You know what, this seems like a good time for a quick supercut for a few of them. One of the more striking parts of the city is this tower. It is a surviving part of a Venetian fortification work from around 1441, a castle built on the ruins of a monastery. Now, while this portion is all that's left of that, the previous examples we've been seeing spring to mind. Not just the Variga Tower from Trogir, but the Fortress of St. Michael's in Šibenik as well, with its corner towers. I hate to keep ducking the question, but the Cathedral of St. Domnius owes little to the Venetians. While its continued upkeep and restoration is quite apparent in, for example, the crisp stonework of the Corinthian capitals ringing its interior, the main body of the cathedral is housed in what was originally constructed as the mausoleum of Diocletian in the 300s AD, and the early inhabitants of Split as a settlement transformed the formerly pagan structure into a church. I mean, the Schadenfreude is particularly strong with this one, as Diocletian was one of the most ruthless murderers of Christians the Roman Empire would ever see. Once again, though, this is Venetian history, not Roman, so I'm afraid I've got to skim over it slightly. The tower was built in around the 1100s and is an amazing example of Romanesque in the Adriatic, but unfortunately what you're seeing now is the result of a near complete remodelling in the early 20th century. While the exact date of this photo is unknown, you can see the renovation underway, so it must have been pretty close to the 1908 works. Admittedly, from the top, the arches are noticeably modern on account of being exquisitely geometrically neat. But based on these sketches, one from 1764 and the other from 1800, it does appear the restoration kept fairly faithful to the original design. Now, while Venetian Split appears fairly well fortified, the hill above Split to the east was determined as too significant a high point to leave exposed should the Ottomans be able to take it and use it to attack from a place of strength. So construction was begun after 1648 when Klis to the north had been retaken. Is that a spoiler for later?
Spoilers from history.
Anyway, in 1657, midway through construction, a resurgent Ottoman force led by Hersekli Ahmed Pasha launched an assault on the partially built fort. Perhaps ironically, this was the worst possible result, the Ottomans having not only the hill, but a partially well-defended position above the city. A counterattack the next day was able to retake the fortress, but there would be several further assaults, and it was only when the Venetian fleet arrived from Kotor that the position was secured. My perennial complaint is that the interior of this fort, despite serving multiple functions as a museum and the city archive, has been given over to car parking. Well, the final part of this story takes place above Split. The fortress of Klis is a truly spectacular sight, and the elevated highways you have to traverse to access Klis are a testament to how significant any navigable route through these mountains would prove. This single choke point, this valley through the mountains, controls access to both Split and Trogir, and with it, the coast out to Brač, Var, and beyond. It's no surprise then that as well as occupation back to the ancient Illyrian tribes, it became a royal seat of the Croat kings as far back as the 800s. And it has some great stories to tell. It managed to repel a Mongol assault in the 1200s. A standout figure in the tale of the fortress is the Croat nobleman Petar Kružić, who held the fortress against Ottoman assaults for nearly 25 years. Tragically, only failing when the papacy made a farcical attempt to finally send reinforcement, and this botched attempt went so badly it led to the death of Kružić and the capture of the fortress by the Ottomans in 1537. While it's not too obvious nowadays, this structure, which was subsequently made into a church, was the mosque. Constructed from what was originally a chapel, a square structure with an octagonal roof. And yeah, this pattern of back and forth will be familiar to anyone who saw our episode on Ottoman architecture in Greece, how the Ottomans often retrofitted existing churches into mosques, and then later the Venetians would retrofit these mosques into churches. It's not readily identifiable as a mosque, as the Venetians made a point of tearing down its minaret. It was named the Church of St. Vitus, and yes, after a little over a century of Ottoman control, the Venetians besieged it in 1648 during the Cretan War that we discussed last time in Šibenik. The 10,000 attackers managed to overcome the 1,000-strong Ottoman force and take the citadel after about 10 days of intense fighting. The Venetians would add to and strengthen the fort quite considerably, not least because the assault in 1648 caused quite a lot of damage, particularly to the western portion. It's a little hard to pick out what is from when, as older layers overlap with Ottoman, Venetian, and even later Austrian structures. Some of the oldest work you can see at the fortress today is this tower, which was referenced as far back as the 1300s when it was controlled by the Croat house of Šibenik. This is known as the Opera Tower. Perhaps the best way to do this is to have a supercut, and while we're doing it, we'll label some of the parts so you can see roughly how it all fits together. While it feels like we've kept it kind of brief, that is the best way to understand the area. Germinated from the Roman city of Salona, the population of which went on to both swell Trogir into a significant medieval town and also transform Split into a major port, and standing guard above it all, controlling access to and from the hinterland, the fortress of Klis. Just got time for Lion Watch. Not loads to go off this week. Working backwards, Klis, no dice, sorry. I think these gates were later Austrian work, and when you have those, it usually means that any lions got ditched. Not much in Split either. It's a city so ancient that the 400-odd years of sole Venetian rule are only a portion of the story. The Roman gates don't appear to have been augmented with lions, or if they were, it's been reversed. An absolutely tiny lion on the crest of the Maralich Palace. Apparently, it was told by its parents it could be anything it wanted to be, and what it wanted to be was a dragon. I feel like there would have been one here, but, well, I might be wrong. Either way, it's gone. Okay, I'd actually forgotten about this. While not a lion, just look at how power-hungry this cat is. I mean, don't tell me he wouldn't destroy us all without even blinking if those cannons were loaded. He'd fire that right into an orphanage without his heart rate going up a single BPM. But returning to the very serious, not at all ridiculous matter of Venetian lions, bottom line, in Split itself, there are only 2 lions we need to concern ourselves with. I'm actually not sure why I only got 2 stills of these that are outside the Domnius Cathedral. There's a tentative 13th century dating on these, but that's based on the assumption they're contemporary with the doors, which means the Venetians themselves are actually off the hook this time. But I mean, what happened here? Just, wow. As I'm always the first to point out, no, of course I could not do any better. But you show me this. I mean, this, I almost start to believe that maybe I could do better, which, I mean, no, I definitely couldn't. But then again, I mean, yeah, obviously no, but look, okay, you know what? Just stop making me believe I can do sculpture, both of you. And sadly, this actually makes these from Trogir less funny. Again, not actually the Venetians this time around. Radovan was a distinctly Croat sculpture, but just how? Like, I'm running out of ways to explain just how this is not what a lion looks like, that the shape is just all off. You know, other than that, there is this on the outside of the castle, but absolute state of that. Now I'm just sad. I've no idea what happened there. Well, okay, more next time. So that's all for this episode. If you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We create all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place you can do it. Also, just drop a comment underneath, like the video and subscribe. You know, that really helps. You can find us on the socials, and we'll be back next episode on the islands of Korčula and Hvar. Catch you soon.